Addiction is such a complicated issue that the discussion around what causes it still has left so many questions unanswered, even after centuries, of debate and the advancement of technology and medicine. Now, the psychology behind addiction covers many bases, whether it is a disease, personal choice, whether it's your background, your childhood, family, social integration. There's so many elements to it that still leave us wondering, where does it start and what causes it? Live from ZTN Studios in Harare, Zimbabwe, you are watching Drug Haven. Now, the show tends to want to look at some of the causes of drug use and abuse and addiction, ultimately to create a drug-free Zimbabwe. My name is Candice Mwakaliele. Thank you so much for joining us, and make sure you are part of this discussion. Or if you are on Twitter, join the discussion that is at ZTN News. Now, today we have former drug user Mike Biller. He is joining us today in the studio. Mike, thank you so much for coming and joining us.
Thank you for having me, Candice.
All right, and on the phone we have integrative psychotherapist your journey with drug use, abuse, and coming clean. How did you get hooked? When did you text? You're 23 now.
I'm 23. Yes, ma'am.
In Form 2, you were 14.
Yes, ma'am. That's correct.
All right. Okay.
So I was 14. One time, I didn't feel anything. The second time, so it became a habit. Once I got used to it, knew me to the drugs. So since 2012, I got addicted.
Okay, 2 years.
Over a year, let's say over a year.
Over a year.
Yes,
and how many drugs did you try within that year?
Within that year, I think it's safe to say only marijuana.
Okay.
Only.
Okay. Well, what else have you taken as you went through this drug use phase? What else did you take?
I tried Bronklin, Fensdale. There's what they call, some I'm even forgetting the names.
How were you getting hold of these drugs?
They're sold in the drug bases, mostly in the ghetto though. We would go to the ghetto and get them.
With your friends?
Yes, ma'am.
So it's a trip, we need this handy to noting.
That's what we'll do.
Were you taking these substances at school?
Yes, I was.
And no one caught you?
No one caught me.
You were at school. You weren't a boarder, I'm assuming. You were a day scholar.
I was a day scholar, yes.
How frequently were you actually taking drugs to school with you to use during the day?
On a daily basis, I would take drugs in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, all day long.
There were no bag searches? There were no...
They were, but if you're a drug addict, you always find a way to get them in.
Wow. Okay, that's interesting. And so what? I'm so stressed.
No, nothing like that. But now that I've grown up a bit more, I'm home. I wouldn't say exactly a broken family, but they were trying. I saw drugs as an escape route. Are
you an only child?
Yes.
Okay. Mirtha, let me bring you in here. So. How common is it for it to, well, especially in the Zimbabwean context, for it to be more?
Candice, this is a very, very complex issue for us to just focus on spread issue. It's not just drugs. There are also elements of work. People can be addicted to their job. There are elements of just that preoccupation and focus on money, focus on power, violence, various difficulties in our lives. As Michael has just been talking about his background, a lot of pressures, maybe the only child, and the isolation in all that. All those issues play a part in how we become, how our self-esteem becomes, whether we have confidence in what we're doing or not. So drugs just become a coping mechanism, if I may put it that way. It's one of the many different, very unhelpful, but...
that addiction is a problem of the person, and that for rehabilitation to be effective and successful, the choices made by an addicted individual have to be factored into treatment. Tell me what you think of this statement, Mirtha.
Individuals end up in a place where there is pain. They did not get there on their own.
Mm-hmm.
Something has happened alongside their relationships, alongside family, alongside friends. You don't find these things onto the person. Again, these are the things that then put pressure onto the person who's already struggling with a problem and saying, well, it's a problem of the person. No, there are underlying issues there. When we talk of choice, actually, how much choice do we really have when we start to think about, I chose to do this? There are a lot of underlying issues, a lot of predisposition that allows you to then make that choice. You've been told by somebody or you've been taught something, just put them to say, well, he's made a choice to take drugs. But we've not, and we often don't look at the precursor to why this person ended up with taking this choice over that choice.
Okay, now, Mike is the person who then becomes hooked on drugs to understand that they actually have underlying issues that have influenced this decision. Because when we then discuss it, it often comes across as a social decision. My friend's brother had taken, and so when he brought it, it seemed, well, it must be safe. His brother has tried it. The other case we had was just themselves, the state they're in when they're presented with some of these choices.
So when we look at ourselves, the things that we do, we've been predisposed to them. We've grown up with them. They're normal to us. But if we take those things out there to the next family, next door, they might look at what we're doing and say, what's that? Why are you doing that? So it's not a simple thing for somebody to look at what they're doing and say, oh, well, this is what, funded by these things. They've become a part of who we are. They've become a part of our identity. So it's not an easy situation to say, well, this person should look at this and be able to deal with it better. Mm-hmm. I'm struggling to make sense with this. These are the things that I've seen being done growing up, but I'm doing them. They're not working for me. What is the problem? What is wrong? The pain that I'm feeling, then that then looks deliberate. Even though I've seen somebody doing it, I'm not really sure whether it is the right thing to do because of where I'm coming from. Because some of the things that I have learned are the very things that are causing me these problems.
Right. Now, Mike, let me come back to you. How common were discussions around drug abuse and drug use in your school?
Every month, we had 2 to 3 assemblies whereby they would give us notice about what's going on out there, and we didn't really talk about it that much.
Okay, so among your peers, it was just from an indulgence perspective. You and your friends were taking drugs. So when you feel guilty, did you have any conflict in your mind about whether you should continue, whether you should stop?
No, not really. The feeling I had the first time, I was like, okay, let me try it. I did enjoy it, so I was like, what is it I'm not doing wrong? Until they started teaching me, no, you're smoking it the wrong way. You have to smoke it this way. Inhale the smoke. Until I started getting high off it, and I started to enjoy it.
Okay, so but again, when you're in assembly, and the teacher or the peer coordinator, whoever it is in front of you, and they're telling you all these negatives of every time you use them, you feel good. How did your drug use start to affect the dynamics between you, let's say, and your family, your parents, your relatives?
Well, it did affect us big time because I ended up running away from home since Form 2 because obviously no home wants their kid to do drugs. So I was like, I want to bingo, let me just leave and my dad would come and find me, bring me back home, take me back to school, still run away again.
Where would you run to?
To my guy's place, my friend's place.
And I'm assuming your friend also lived with his parents.
Yes.
What would they say?
Would actually lie. Yo, my friend, what's up? How you doing? I've got situations back at home. I would actually tell him the truth, but to his parents would tell them like,
there's a situation
there's
at
a
home.
situation back at home, so I can't stay there. I have to crash here, sleep here for a couple of weeks.
And the parents were not talking and not discussing some of these things. They were not asking each other, hi, your son is here, what's going on?
Obviously they did, but we weren't aware. Obviously they did, but they would just give us 2-3 days to stay so that they can just see what's really going on.
All right. Mirtha, some of the signs of drug use are, of course, these changes, erratic changes in especially when you look at the younger ones, in their behavior. A child who was once very, obedient, very respectful, very caring, suddenly is now running away from home and telling lies. How should parents be trying to look into these issues a bit more deeper than my child is just going through a difficult, rebellious phase?
Right. There's a number of issues there. Just to go back to what Michael was saying in terms of learning about drugs and hearing these speeches in assembly. We are more emotional beings than we are intellectual beings. We can know that this thing is dangerous, but we'll still go into it anyway. Because we feel some kind of way, we feel passionate about doing it. We take risks, yeah? So our emotions tend to be more powerful than what we know. So we can intellectualize that, oh yeah, I know about depression, I know about anxiety, I know the symptoms, I know the signs, I know all these things, but it doesn't stop you from suffering depression and anxiety. So that's one of the key things that we need to understand with these things. We need to make sure we understand them on a personal level rather than just having the knowledge that we might have heard or read in a book.
Right.
But coming back to your question, the signs and symptoms for parents to start thinking about and perhaps looking out for and thinking what to do with them. This quiet child that you've described, sometimes we look at those things and think it's okay for somebody to be quiet because they're not causing any problem. But there might be a lot more going on inside that quiet mind that seems quiet because they're just not talking, they're not processing whatever it is that they've gone through or they're going through. So whatever solutions they're coming up in their own minds in that quiet space may be bad solutions, may be wrong choices. But because they're not discussing it to get validation, to get that checked out with others, to share that understanding, to say, is what I'm doing right, could actually lead someone to a much worse off place. So it's very important to create an environment, especially for parents. The problem that we have when we look at our society, especially the African culture, we don't have an open environment where our children will feel they can express themselves. They can talk about what dad doesn't agree with. Because what dad might be going on with is what he grew up learning, what he was doing during their time. There was no internet, there was no apps. So they did things differently. That was then. What we are doing now is very different. And I might want to contribute to what we're learning in school, but dad doesn't want to hear that.
Right.
Dad thinks what they did is what made him the person that he is and where he's at, and for us to have the food on the table. But if we try to do what he did 20 years ago, this is what we're saying. This is where the disparity comes in. This is where the dissonance plays a part. That no longer computes in today's society. It doesn't fit anymore. But these are the things that our parents want to enforce onto the children. So it's important for parents to start looking at things slightly differently. Yes, granddad did this. He did it that way. But does it really apply to today's society? Does it apply to today's culture?
Right.
And the society, one of the other things as well that we also need to be very clear as parents is the teens, the time, the adolescence, is one of the most difficult life stages. Okay? In the sense that we've got a child who's been largely dependent on their parents. And all of a sudden, they're facing the prospect of having to be a grown-up and having to be independent and having to navigate life on their own without the umbrella of the parents. So that creates a very wide range of issues, the identity crisis, who am I, anxieties. And if you don't have a good support system, it's very easy to get lost. It's very easy, like what Michael was saying, in Form 2, these are the starting stages of, oh my goodness, I'm having to face this world without mom and dad here. Oh, how am I going to do it?
Right.
And with that, you then start to feel some of these pain, some of the distress, some of the anxiety. And it's very easy to find yourself then wanting to take these pills to calm down. I was listening to when he was describing which pills he was taking. He was taking what we call anxiolytics or tranquilizers, okay? These are medications that we use when somebody is highly distressed or violent, and we just want them to calm down and work things through.
Right.
But these are the things that boys and girls are taking unregulated on the streets. And problem with some, especially those classes of drugs, is they are highly addictive. 1 minute you're feeling distressed, you're anxious, and then you pop a pill into your mouth, and 15 minutes later, you're feeling calm, you're feeling all is great. The next moment you feel anxious, you feel afraid, you're going to think of that tablet.
Right.
And we feel anxious and afraid a lot, you know?
Right.
So you can just about imagine how addictive that becomes. If you feel anxious 20 times a day and you pop in those 20 tablets, that is causing a bigger problem, not only psychologically, but also physically, because there are also physical processes happening that are causing you to feel like that. And you just taking the tablet to shut that down creates other problems physically as well.
Right.
So this is where the huge interplay between physical health issues and mental health issues are.
Right. Thank you, Martha. Now, Mike, how many years drug-free are you?
6 years.
6 years. Well done. What was that moment that made you say, I'm not doing this anymore?
That moment came, can I just go back a little bit?
Go ahead.
When I was doing these drugs, when whoever is doing drugs, you end up like you need to support your own habits. So if you don't have money, you end up stealing. That's what I started doing. Started stealing back at home. Got incarcerated once, twice, a couple of times. So when I got locked up, I think it was like my 4th time, if I'm not mistaken. The look on my granny's face, my grandparents, my uncles and my aunties, it just showed, look, Michael, we're tired of coming here in the same place,
Right.
seeing you here.
Right.
That's when I switched on and said, you know what? When
I can't do this anymore.
I'm going to change. I have to make a change.
At this point, where were you in your education journey?
I had dropped out actually in high school,
At what point did you drop out?
Form 4.
Form 4. Okay, so you've dropped out of high school, you're starting to steal. Your conscience didn't speak to you at any point prior to this look of disappointment. You were okay, you thought you were fine, and all your actions were normal.
Yeah, when you're doing drugs, you think what you're doing is normal and the world is crazy, but you're the one who's normal.
When you dropped out, what did your parents say to you?
They tried to get me back in school. When I actually dropped out, I was an A student, in fact. The school I was at, they were about to make me a prefect, if I'm not mistaken, so my parents tried to get me back into school. That's when I ran away from home, stayed away from home for like 2-3 months.
How did they discover you were taking drugs?
You know, it starts showing. If you take drugs for quite some time, it starts showing. Your responses, how you talk, how you dress, the way you do things, it just starts showing.
Who had the talk with you about your drug use? Your mom or your dad?
Everyone, but I did not listen.
You didn't listen.
I didn't listen.
You didn't listen. And Emertha, this is a common thing that, as you've mentioned rightfully, when you're on drugs and you think your behavior is normal, you're not really going to listen. But as you were speaking earlier, you explained something that was very, very important to note, and I wish we maybe would be able to apply it a bit more, that we are more emotional beings than we are intellectual beings. How do we start to acknowledge that and use that messaging that appeals to our emotions to kind of speak to people and get them, if you haven't started the journey on drugs, get you away from it, and if you have, kind of just get you off it? Like, how do we change the messaging to make it more effective?
So this is where the concept of psychology and psychotherapy comes into play, because this is when we help people to understand and navigate through their emotions. Because simply put, Candice, emotions are energy. That's pretty much what they are. Now, depending on what emotion you have, it depends on what energy is required at that time. Okay? So when you've got, I'll give you a typical example. A lot of people are afraid of snakes, yeah?
Right.
When all of a sudden a snake appears in the room that you're in, whether it's just fallen out of the ceiling or it just managed to slither in through the gap in the door, your anxiety is going to hit the roof. Okay?
Yes.
That's your fright, fear, fight response. That is saying there is danger in the room. You need to do something. And your brain getting that information says, okay, what do we need? We need a lot of adrenaline because we need to run away. We need to fight. We need to do this. We need more energy than what we have right now. Okay? So that surge of energy into your body helps you to fight, and then when you're hit back or when you're beaten, you actually don't feel the pain, because part of that response is to numb the body so that it doesn't feel that pain.
Right.
But if we don't use that energy, or if we just sit there and we just can't do anything, it doesn't go away easy. It actually burns. It's painful. And this is what people focus on when they say, I've got anxiety. They're focusing on the pain, on the burden that this chemical that has been injected into their body is feeling like, but they're not looking at what do they actually need to do with it.
Right.
Do they need to run away? What do they need to do? So with our youth, they get this anxiety, but they don't know what to do with it. They don't understand that actually I'm feeling anxious because I'm going out dressed like this. I'm not wearing the latest label sneakers, and my friends are going to laugh at me. All those little issues get in the way of how we feel. And the anxiety is more about, okay, what do I do? Do I have a strong sense of self to understand that really Nikes don't really matter? I can go in North Star and be okay because all I need is to protect my feet.
Right.
So, but with the peer pressure and the bullying that then comes along, say, well, how would you be wearing North Star when everybody else is wearing Nike Airs and everything? And it takes that strong character to say, you know what, it doesn't matter. What matters is I am focused on what's important for me.
All right.
So these are the crucial issues.
All right. Now, Mirtha, unfortunately, we are out of time, and so we do need to conclude. I will ask you in conclusion and very briefly, how do we create strong support networks for people who are on drugs and want to get off them? How do we help them? How do we reach out to them? What's the best approach to take?
Right. As I was mentioning earlier on, as a society, it's a societal problem. It's not an individual problem, unfortunately. I'm going to have to try to emphasize that point. What Michael's gone through, it wasn't out of his choosing. It was because of pressures that were around him. So as a society, we need to understand that often we put pressure on each other to perform differently or to do the things that I haven't got the background or the resources to do. Because I can see you driving a nice car, how am I going to be able to drive a nicer car as well? Instead of me just driving my nice car and doing whatever I want to do, I want my friend to do the same thing for him to fit in with me. So it's those social pressures that we put on each other. And when you look at a lot of these, they're more relational than they are just a person on their own.
Right.
Relationships around us play a role as well. So as a society, we need to understand those things and to be able to help each other.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us today, Mirtha. We appreciate your insight. Mike, as your final thoughts, if you could go back and change anything on that particular day when you started using drugs, what would you do differently?
Well, if I could go back, ma'am, honestly speaking, I wouldn't change anything because I'm happy with the person I've become now.
Right.
The experience, it made me stronger. It taught me a lot of things, and some of them are valuable. I use those lessons in real life today.
And for someone who is about to start that journey, is it worth it?
It's not. It only ends up two ways. You either die because you're of the drugs or you end up in prison.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us, and well done on being 6 years clean.
Thank you for having me, ma'am.
All right. Now, we hope that this discussion has been insightful to somebody today, and that you are, if you need the help, you are actively going to seek it out today and acknowledge that this is not the journey for you. My name is Candice Mwakalele from myself, the team behind the cruise at the scenes at ZTN. Be kind to each other, but be kinder still to yourselves. We'll see you next time.